For more on this, we are now joined by Professor in International Relations and South African Chair in African Diplomacy and Foreign Policy, Chris Landsberg, for a conversation on Russian President Vladimir Putin, who will not be attending the BRICS Summit in August. Professor, thank you so much for joining us here on the late edition. One would ask that, are you surprised at all by this mutual agreement and decision taken by South Africa and Russia?
Am I surprised? I suppose I'm surprised by the timing. I always said I think it would come later, but it seems to make sense in the sense that President Putin clearly next week wishes to have a successful Africa summit. There also seems to be something else at play here, and that is BRICS is so important, I've always maintained, for countries like China and Russia, that President Putin has decided, to almost sort of play Russian roulette. It's not worth it. But here's the fascinating thing about the implications for South Africa of the decision. President Putin didn't allow a court to rule that he is unwelcome, and is therefore just by implication, put the matter squarely in the court of the executive to take a decision on the ICC. I think BRICS is quite frankly, BRICS members are quite frankly irritated with South Africa. I think they feel that South Africa's own domestic situation and the lawfare that's going on in our country, lawfare. And you heard John Steenhuisen now brazenly, runs to the courts over everything. I think BRICS is irritated. So let me just make one final comment on this first point you made. Let me tell you what one of the implications are, because you started by saying, so the in-person BRICS Summit will now go ahead. Guess what? It's the first time in 15 years that a founder member of BRICS, a very important founder member, will not be there. The agenda is going to be affected. Some key decisions will not be taken. How many people are aware of the fact that Russia actually has a prime minister? Russia has a prime minister. They could have sent the prime minister to at least to elevate the stature. What they're doing, they're almost saying to the South Africans, okay, we've agreed mutually, and the president also said they will reveal details later about how they came to the decisions, and it seems the Russians want that to happen. But I think South Africa must take responsibility for the fact that the summit will not be the one that they expected.
Yeah, and it brings me to, my next question, and you touched on it a bit, saying that, of course, a founding member of BRICS, the leader, will not be coming to South Africa. This is the first meeting in 15 years. At the same time, this is the first physical meeting since COVID. What does that say, by the two parties taking this decision?
I think tactically, so let's draw a distinction between tactics and strategy. I think tactically, it is a very good way out for both at the moment. So in other words, South Africa can breathe a sigh of relief. So does President Putin, and the West can interpret it for all they want as, he wanted to avoid the specter of an arrest. Strategically, it's not good, because what I'm saying to you, we're going to have a watered down a version of the BRICS Summit. Very key decisions that, for example, would have been decided upon, it is my considered opinion, such as de-dollarization and the expansion of BRICS members, of BRICS by other members, Turkey, Kazakhstan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, UAE, all of them might actually now be postponed to next year's decision. That's the implication. But I think the real threat of a declaration of war, all those things have now subsided. but the ICC issue has not gone away for South Africa. South Africa must tackle that issue head on. And let me just remind you, just briefly in a few seconds, it will take at least 12 months for South Africa to leave the ICC if they decide that. But there's another option. South Africa could pass an act of law or make a change, for example, to the Diplomatic Immunities and Privileges Act, and put in there that all instruments, including the Rome Statute, does not trump our domestic law. The ANC did not explore these things. What they did between al-Bashir and now seems to have been a wasted long.
All right. Professor, also coming to the issue there from the political parties in our country, of course, the DA declaring a victory here, but the EFF saying that this is an undermining of South Africa's sovereignty. When it comes particularly, it seems as if here South Africa was forced, technically, their hand was forced, of course, to take this decision alongside with Russia. What does it say about our country's sovereignty?
No, first of all, I think Mr. Malema is right that, and this is not an attack on the ICC, that the fact that the issue of a warrant resulted in a main member of BRICS not coming means that the sovereign decision of a country has been affected by the ICC. But on the other hand, as I've said repeatedly, including last night on other platforms, South Africa cannot have its cake and eat it. You cannot sign up to the Rome Statute and want to look good by playing the normative game, pro-human rights, pro-justice, and so on, and sign up to an instrument in that. But when it comes to having to execute the obligations thereof, you don't do it, right? And on the other hand, there is serious national interest that the DA just doesn't seem to get itself to express itself on. And that lacuna, that contradiction in our foreign policy between the normative, ethical dimensions of our foreign policy, including our purported commitment to issues of justice by signing up to our own statute, versus the national interest and engaging an instrument like BRICS that is now going to become a real rival, certainly a countervailing force for the G7, can help us to overcome serious dilemmas we have in this country, not in the least poverty, unemployment, and so on. But South Africa will have to do some serious soul searching. I make a prediction for you. The ICC matter is not going away, and in fact, I would not be surprised if it will find itself on the agenda. Remember, one of the things the president's statement said we're going to release the agenda later.
All right.
So what that means for me, with President Putin not coming, the agenda is not being resolved.
My last question to you, Professor, how will this actually affect the relationship between Pretoria and Russia?
I mean, I think irritation. I think the relationship will go on. I think BRICS has been given a reprieve. What could have resulted in a terrible fallout within BRICS, not just between Russia and South Africa, but broader, has been averted. It's clear to me that our president is now preparing to go to the Russia-Africa Summit, where the matter will be taken further. I think the relationship is strong, but there's some irritations in the relationship.
All right. Okay,
Let me repeat finally for you. The ICC matter must be addressed by the South African government.
Professor Chris Landsberg, thank you so much for your time. That is a professor in international relations and a South African chair in African diplomacy and foreign policy, saying that, with the likes of Vladimir Putin not attending the BRICS Summit, he predicts that it will indeed be a watered down version of a BRICS Summit.